I see the meeting's recorded. I don't think I have the ability to share screens, and I'm not sure if it's on my end.
Oh, we can make you the host.
I'm hoping that it's not on my end.
Now it might be. I'm letting you do it now. I just did it.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was
Let
just
me just
hoping not to
say-
have to get on the phone again with my IT.
No.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things I tried to emphasize before we started is that, even though this data may be troubling to some in particular areas across the country or various jurisdictions, one thing we do want to emphasize is that this didn't happen overnight. This is a snapshot of time and space, but in reality, if you look back at this report and compare it to the previous report, there have been significant improvements in some areas. And so we don't want to make it seem as though any one jurisdiction or any one annual conference is, suddenly terrible when it comes to how they're compensating women. It's been a process and it's been going on for quite some time, numbers of years. And so I think that might help frame some of this too, because sometimes we're quick to point fingers, and we want to be clear that we don't do that.
Absolutely. So I'll piggyback off of that. Some of the major points to sort of take away from the report that set the stage is understanding the long-term struggle that has existed in two primary areas. One, in terms of the ways in which women are represented proportionally across the denomination and clergy. That has been a struggle over time, where in the report I shared that early, and I think this may be what you just covered, Pam, that in the past, women were like drastically underrepresented. And now there has been some progress that has been made, especially in the past 10 years, where still women's representation among clergy is not on par with the proportion that we are represented in congregations, which is over half of congregations. So there's still great disparity in the way that women are represented. But for women to represent 32% of full-time clergy on 2020 data is actually a measure of progress from some of the reported numbers in the past. We don't want to put a whole lot of merit in that because we don't necessarily understand the mechanisms behind why progress is made, but it is something of note. Another insight that comes out of this report is, of course, the disparity in compensation. And the major additional insight in this second report is the ways in which the proportional difference in women's earnings in clergy and then men in clergy and their earnings is something that varies across conference. So the reason why we do these sort of geographic analyses is because we want to account for things like geographic variations in the ways people are paid, cost of living. And what we are hoping to do in these breakdowns is to give people insights and to give people facts and figures that they can contextualize in their relative conferences, okay? But there's gonna be some more strategies that we need to use in order to really activate these insights and make them meaningful at the conference and jurisdictional level. So what is gonna be helpful for us to do today is actually to look not only at the report, the most recent report, which you see here on the right, which shows some of the findings from the 2020 data. We're also going to look at the report that was published in 2017 that looked at 2015 data. And this is an example of how you can frame progress in each jurisdiction and conference. Some things to note about these two reports is that the methods that were used for analysis are consistent across reports. So this is one of the first times that we can really make an apples to apples comparison and understanding that the approach to the analysis was the same. And so the numbers that we're seeing should be comparable across time. So I'm going to actually move to the section, and Reverend Purtle, please tell me if I'm being repetitious here, but for the gender compensation composition of the UMC clergy, did you say that this is something that has already been discussed?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll move straight to the meat and potatoes. Let's talk about the gender pay gap.
Yes, that's where we are.
Okay, sweet deal. So in the 2020 report, we repeated our findings from the Series 1 report, where of course we know that in the 4 different ways that we have decided to characterize compensation, that is salary, housing allowance for clergy members who received a housing allowance, parsonage amount for those who received a parsonage, and then a measure that we call total compensation. Total compensation looking at the sum of salary and either housing allowance or parsonage amount. Okay, so we found in our first report that women still make significantly less in any single one of those measures. And when we say significantly less, we're talking a statistical significance, something that we have tested using what's called a t-test to see if those differences are meaningful enough and have enough of a contrast for it to be statistically sound and significant. So I'm going to fast forward in the report to the tables by conference for compensation, or sorry, by jurisdiction. And then to the same table within the 2015 report, okay, to make a contrast. So as you see, from 2015, we're taking a look at average salary of clergy men and clergy women. The average salary from 2020 is to the right. In 2017, we used 2015 data, and you see raw numbers here. We have also included in the 2020 report a standard deviation that helps us understand the spread of the salaries that were earned for each jurisdiction. So this can be something that is useful, but I want to direct our attention to the raw numbers from the 2020 salary study for jurisdiction. So if you're wanting to see if a jurisdiction is making progress, you want to not only look at the difference between women and men within a jurisdiction and the salaries that were reported. So you also want to look at what's called a difference in the differences. So for example, in the North Central Conference, you see that there's about a $4,000 difference between men and women clergy in the North Central Conference. That is compared to not only what men and women made in 2015, but also you might decide to look at the difference between men and women from 2015 and 2020. So we see that there used to be about a $7,000 difference, and it has narrowed to about a $4,000 difference in the North Central jurisdiction in 2020. So looking at the differences in difference is one way to meaningfully say, not only is there disparity that still exists when we look at the contrast between men and women, but how has that disparity changed over time? So I want to note at this moment that if people have questions in the moment, please feel free to actually unmute and ask those questions. I can't see this right now, but I imagine as we keep going through these tables, questions will emerge. Okay, so another way to read the tables in this report is by looking at the subscripts. And I'm actually going to increase the size of this table so that we can see it. So these subscripts actually contain, or superscripts, forgive me, they contain a great deal of information that can activate the insights. So for example, in this salary table from 2020, I have indicated those jurisdictions with an A where there is a significant difference in clergy women and clergy men. But for people who want to go a step further and understand when other factors that are very plausible, plausibly related to how much people get paid, such as the length of service, potentially the age of clergy, and membership type, when those things are held steady, a superscript of B would tell us that there's still a significant difference that is unexplained by those factors, okay? So at this point, without any additional factors to consider, we are left with the notion of it being a gendered difference. And until we consider and factor in other factors that may be influential in creating those disparities, right now it's safe for us to understand that there's a gendered difference. So we see that superscript be present for North Central, South Central, Southeastern, and Western conferences. Just like we looked at the raw difference in salaries between men and women change from 2015 to 2017, you can also check and see if a superscript appears or disappears across 2015 to 2017, okay? So that is the way that we're going to read through the report, but also across reports in order to create some actionable insights. And I'm going to direct our attention to a couple of spaces and places where this is supremely important. But just for a minute, I want to pause the share to see if there are any questions. I see some comments in the chat.
Yes, I was going to mention, thank you, Alice, for being here. Love your feedback. Alice Williams out of the Florida Annual Conference just made a comment saying that the skew is also interesting, as by now it seems the effect of having more men in clergy roles longer than women should have evened out. And I think you're slightly touching on that a little bit already, Michaela. And then Sally echoes her comments, talking about how over the last 38 years of her ministry, she's heard that the difference in salaries is because women haven't been around long enough to get those higher salaries. And this study basically is putting that to rest after all these years. And then, of course, Alice is mentioning the impact of race will be interesting to see as well, which we're going to have in our next session in January. Alice, hope you come back. And we're going to be looking at how that may be an impact. But Anne, you want to say something?
Yeah, one piece of information, like congregational size or actually roles. So we don't necessarily know, let's say the membership type comparing elders to elders. Is one an assistant pastor? Is one a senior pastor? Is one associate? I mean, to really compare every apple type to its exact apple type, you would need to almost see what is the job description, right? Because, and again, in some ways, if it's a small congregation, well, guess what? That pastor's doing the budget, doing building maintenance, doing A, B, C, and D. In some ways, that comp should be higher than someone who may has 3 assistants and stereotypically pretty much just has to work on the Sunday sermon. So there's just so much that is really hard to do exact comparisons. I don't know enough to know, again, thinking about the MDivs, just some graduates of particular seminaries tend to start out at higher salaries than some other seminary. If you're from a more conservative place, such as Asbury, depending upon where you go, you're valued a lot more than if somehow maybe you're that graduate going to another location that, let's just say, is more progressive in its thinking. So while doing membership type to membership type helps compare elders to elders, deacons to deacons, local pastors to local pastors, it still doesn't give us information. But what are the demands of the job? You know, same title, people can do very different things that may or may not be a clue to some of the, at least the salary part of the compensation.
Mhm. Very true.
Absolutely. I see Pat Bostic with a hand up.
Hi, I'm just trying to understand here. Is the salary structure not designed for a pastor as opposed to female pastor and male pastor? Is that what I'm hearing? Because if so, that is disturbing. I would a salary package or payroll, whatever is designed for a pastor, not women pastors and not men pastors.
But I think you have to be mindful of the challenge that we're trying to expose, is that salaries are often set in the local church, right? They determine their budget and what they can afford to pay. And, and for some of us who are clergy, when we walk into positions, we're given all kinds of reasons to justify why we aren't going to get what the previous pastor had, who happened to be a male, whether it be years of experience or whatever it could be, that they can justify to make sense of it based on their salary. And there's not a lot of mechanism other than the actual conference soaring it up to make it a whole lot better. So what we're seeing is it plays out in the realities of women in ministry, that in spite of the fact that there should be equity, it's not always the case. And that's what this data is proving to us.
Absolutely.
And if we don't expose it, we'll never fix it, right? So we're just exposing it, trying to put it out in the open so that we now are mindful, because many people didn't even know. I've been in conferences in different parts of the country and they had no idea that their numbers were what they are. So it's just helpful for people to understand that, so that when you go back to your local church and your COSRO could be doing a salary study at your annual conference level. That has nothing to do with anything GCOSRO does. You could be doing a salary study so that you can look at what's happening in your annual conference and be able to say, wow, we didn't realize that women clergy are being paid at a disproportionate lower level. If you're not doing that work, then sometimes that stuff just stays under the carpet and no one ever knows until we put out this kind of report, and then where everybody's shocked. So,
and Pam, I don't know what the role of the pastor parish relations committee, but particularly as people come and go from that committee, that can change philosophy, biases, intended or not intended, what has happened fiscally in the past couple of years, and they're reprioritizing, projects over people. I don't know. But yeah, I think there's a lot of local control, and if it's not understood how they go about what they do, then right, you can't learn why have they done what they've done.
That's very true.
Another thing that I would highlight is that at this point, when we have considered the factors that we do have data on, what remains is a difference that we only can attribute to gender because we just don't have other information about what could be explanatory. So right now, gender is standing in the place of what could potentially be other numerous factors that determine the difference. I don't believe, even though I can't say that I know, that there are two separate sort of schemas for determining salary that's just simply on the basis of gender. Some things that might be plausible or believable that are just not explored, since we don't have long-term longitudinal data. We don't know if there are some people who have been grandfathered into some old system that was definitely more sexist than it has ever been before, and they have just been in service a long time, still enjoying the benefits of having started out at a higher place than women, right? We cannot, or I won't say we cannot, but it's just not convention to demote someone or to dock pay in order for equity to be achieved. We would rather pay be increased for women instead of men's pay be dragged down to that of men or women. We don't want to drag people's salaries down. So if I could envision a study that implored further as to why some of these disparities persist, I would want to look at that. And then Anne and Reverend Pirtle have both given some super helpful information about how else we can think about it. But right now, we just don't have more information to explore. The fact that age in some instances still is significant, even when we consider years of service, you wonder, how is that playing into it? Are people seeing age as some sort of proxy for experience? Even though that's really hard to interpret from statistical significance. That's just something that was significant in some of the models. Another last note I will say is that an apples to apples comparison isn't even always possible at some of the annual conference levels, because, for example, you may not have enough women in clergy who are elders to even have a meaningful contrast at every single level, right? To see if there is parity among elders or among women who are deacons, or women and men who are deacons, and so forth. So there are some real challenges that are introduced whenever we think both about the composition of clergy, men and women who are clergy at each level or each membership type, and also trying to overlay looking at contrast and compensation. And until we have more parity in terms of how women are represented at large among clergy, we won't be able to see even more meaningful contrast in order to be able to interpret the differences in compensation.
I just want to point out another comment in the chat. Basically, Alice was just saying how some churches have held over the past year their salary levels due to the downward trend in membership and giving, and how that and the lack of giving cost of living increases has also impacted compensation and makes the problem worse for women, and particularly women of color. I think this is really interesting because when churches do that, and I just know from my own experience, if it's a larger church with a larger salary budget and the pastor is a male, they may not mind that they're not getting much of an increase for a year or two. But a woman who's making half that would really suffer in a congregation who justifies the lack of an increase for those same reasons. And
Yes.
so that's an unfortunate truth that we have to deal with as well. And again, we're hoping that by putting this information out there, that more people will be more interested in this data, that we will have the annual conference, COSROs, become more actively engaged in this work, so that that can help us continue to raise this information forward and get people to do better. When you have opportunity to compensate better, then do so. Bethany.
Okay, so that's actually what I was wondering about, is kind of how do we take this information and move forward? So I know, like, one of the things that I've seen with my male colleagues, and this is purely anecdotal, but it'd be interesting to get actual data on it. But my male colleagues, like, when they have children, they often get raises. Whereas that's not the case for females, because, you know, we're being annoying to them by taking maternity leave, whereas they need more money to take care of child. You know, not that we're the same people or anything. But I'm wondering if there's any type of a movement forward in how do we train churches, and how do we train pastors to be able to talk about these things in ways that are good? Because I know some of the research, you know, in like the lean in era said, if a woman asks for a raise, sometimes she's actually punished rather than just being told no, whereas men are usually, like, the worst they get is a no. So is there any kind of forward looking on how to talk about that? Because I know lots of women, my colleagues, who haven't had raises in years, including a cost of living increase. And I've been fortunate where I am, but I don't know that it's I don't know that it's anything that I'm doing versus what she's doing, or it's the church, or if it's the people that are in leadership in the church.
I would like to chime in and just say, Alice Williams, who is partnering with me on a project for GCOSRO called Welcoming a Woman Pastor. Alice, if you want to chime in with me, that'd be great. We are working on this project to produce it and get it out next year. And it's going to be focusing on 5 different subject areas. And those each areas are dealing with bishop and cabinet level, district superintendent, SPRC, outgoing clergy, and incoming clergy, and how their roles at each of those levels impacts the onboarding process for female clergy. And the SPRC and the district superintendent piece, I think, tie up very closely into salary compensation. And so, Alice, why don't you speak a little bit to, because she works in this area as a professional, and you might be able to add some light to that piece of the conversation as well.
Well, Pam, thank you. You're very kind. I did spend about 20 years with the Disney Organization in Human Resources out of a 30-year career there. And compensation is never easy in any organization. But I will tell you that coming from corporate America into the church, it was incredibly eye-opening because the church does it so differently than most other areas. One of the first, I want to go back. One of the huge things that I think Cosro and the people who are on this call can do is to think creatively about how to raise awareness. I think that's the first step, is bringing this information forward and bringing it forward in a way that is understood, easily understood by all. And I think it's the whole picture. I think it's the study. I think it's the findings. I think it's understanding the impact, and then having some stories. Just people share some stories about what their experience has been. Now, I don't mean all negative, but just in general. I think that's an important piece. Then the second thing I would say is that as you're looking at this, we need to be asking a lot of internal questions. Would broadbanding, if we had more salary level conversations and recommendations that could go out, would that help individuals? So if you've been in clergy role, and you've been there for so many years, what is the band that you would fall into? I come from a background of paying for performance to a degree. So I do think that there may be some of that. The church really doesn't get into a lot of that either, but that might be another piece too. So just some things to consider. But yes, Pam, we will continue to work with this because I think this is a huge area of opportunity for us.
And Alice, before you go or turn your mic off, Christine Dotson raised a really great question. Thank you, Christine, for being here with us today. She's also participating in our annual conference, Cosro training, and we're so excited about having her with us. So thank you. But she asked, in what ways does the church compensate differently than everyone else? And I know, having worked in HR, I get that too. But I know with Disney, you had your knees in it really deep. So tell us, how do you think it's so different?
So the biggest thing that I would say is most organizations, most corporations, even if you are in a district area, whatever, those compensation structures are somewhat. It's just that there is a compensation structure. There's a very loose one that I see in the church, but churches pay based on what their SPRCs and finances can do. Right. So there's no guarantee necessarily that structure is going to be adhered to. The other thing that's very interesting to me is that for a long period of time in the church, it appears to me that you grew in your compensation based on movement to a larger church or to a larger ministry that you were going into. I'm going to suggest to you that we really need to rethink that as a denomination, given where we are and what I think may be going to happen in the future, where we're looking at things like fresh expressions. We haven't even begun to think about how do we compensate those truly innovative, entrepreneurish type clergy who are going to go out not to build a church, but maybe to launch into a fresh expression. I think about the whole deacon aspect as well. I mean, and other roles that are going to emerge that we aren't even familiar with. We need to be able to create what I think is a flexible compensation program that can be used throughout the church. And in my mind, looking at areas of where you live, there will be differences in pay rates and inflation and that kind of thing. But looking in ways that help guide SPRCs and annual conferences and what their pay structure should be.
That's excellent, Alice. Excellent. Michaela? You're muted, Michaela.
One of the ways that I have seen this addressed in other institutional spaces, especially in institutions that have moved to a more equitable frame where there have been disparity in the past. There may be equity now, but it does not impact people who's had a compensation structure that was framed prior to the more equitable changes. And so there are some institutional spaces that actually build in some quotient that is corrective over time, right? That while we're talking about sort of flexibility within a human resource framework, it actually addresses for past disparities in a way that is corrective in an equitable way. So I know that it is sort of radical to talk in this way about thinking about the past harms and disparities that women have experienced, the additional tax associated with some roles of womanhood like parenting and caregiving, and the toll that has taken over time, the disparity that has introduced over time, and that is still present today, plausibly. For there to be a quotient where women are actually paid equitably so that some of these collective disparities shrink. So it is a hard sell, but if an institution is really committed to turning this around, it's understandable that some of the pipeline issues, like the promotion of women in clergy to being elders and going through the ordination process, which are other junctures that also have disparities present, if those take longer time to remedy, then this sort of equitable quotient to fix compensation is one really radical, really revolutionary approach to think about. And one of the ways to use this data to support that sort of claim is by looking at the length of time. You have 2015 data and 2020 data, and the very little progress that has been made over that time. It actually creates a wonderful justification to do something that more expeditiously addresses the disparities. Okay.
But we're not quite there yet.
Oh, right.
That would be very lofty, but we're gonna get there. And I believe that this work and these conversations and our Welcoming Women Pastor Project and some other things that I know that are going on in the church are going to address that. I would like to ask Michaela, because I know we're getting close to time, and I know some people want to hear a little bit about the differences between the different jurisdictions. So if you could just highlight that a little bit. Do you mind jumping into that? Because I think that would be really interesting.
Two things that I can promise, and I'm promising this on the recording, Reverend Purtle, because I just really, again, want to be of service. I want to promise to go very quickly to how to read the jurisdictional and the conference level data to activate it. I also want to promise an additional recording on how to read the report that I will record and make available to all of you, so that each one of you can go look at the jurisdictional level and at the conference level and take the specific insights back to your congregations and to your central committees. There's no way I'm leaving here today, coming in this late. I have not answered any specific questions, and I would love to. So I'm going to make myself available in that way. And also, if there's any additional questions that you all have about the report, they could either be fielded through Reverend Purtle, or you could feel free to contact me directly if there's something specific about your jurisdiction or conference that you want illuminated or want to have further clarification on.
Let me just ask real quick. We might just need a follow-up session, a part 3 for salary. Maybe we should do that next month. Would that be good? Because I know people come in for an hour and they take time away from their work to do this. And I'd hate to have anyone miss, because this is good stuff. Yes. And I don't even want you to rush through it. I'm almost ready to stick a fork in it and pause where we are, and then come back in a month with you to do your entire second presentation from beginning to end. And that way you'll have more time to get into that other piece. We don't want to miss it. Michaela, this work is just amazing. And it's been so helpful. Can I get a show of hands to anybody that'd be willing to do that and come back next month to a part 3? rather than rush through
Oh,
in 10 minutes today?
great. I
All
would
right.
be honored to do that. I would be
Okay.
honored.
I just think it's just too valuable for you to rush through it. And I am so sorry, you know, we are so appreciative of you being here and showing up in spite of your technical problems. Things happen. We make mistakes. We have problems, the flat tire, whatever it is. It is in no way a problem. Don't even feel bad. You don't have to apologize. We're just glad you made it. I'm glad you're okay.
Gratitude.
So yes, yes. So at the end of the day, I would much rather do another 1 hour with you than to try to wrap up in 10 minutes, because I know what happens. People will start leaving because they can't stay, and then they'll miss the real good meat of what you have to share. Is that all right?
Yes, and I'm sharing my contact information.
Okay.
If people would like to send questions either in advance or in the meantime,
Okay.
before the next session, I'm happy to make myself available.
Okay. All right. And Miguel, when you stay on with us, we've got a couple
Yes.
things for you. And that way we will do another session. We'll get you tied down with a date. Jen is here. She'll get that date and put that out in your newsletter, and also check your emails, because I send it out to you all in emails as well, so that we can make sure that everybody knows. But I just think this is such a rich conversation. And we're not having a lunch and learn in December. Well, we weren't going to do one in November either, but we'll do one in the first weekend or second week in November, so that we can get this done. And then we'll have you come back in January for the next one, dealing with the intersectionality of race and gender and how that has impacted compensation across clergy work. And if there are any suggestions you all have for another topic that you'd like us to review, drop that in the chat box for us, because we want to continue these conversations. And again, I want to announce next Saturday from 10 to 1, if you're on an annual conference COSRO committee, or if you're chairing your annual conference COSRO committee, or if you know who your annual conference COSRO people are, tell them they need to be at our training session. And if they don't have, oh, you're already putting it in there. That is the link for you to sign up and register for that. Thanks, Jen. She is so fast. And that way you can make sure they're there and getting training. We're going to be talking about salary studies, how some of these other annual conference COSROs completed one. How did they approach the work? What made them ask questions to even consider legislation that they presented to their annual conference? All these kinds of things every AC COSRO should be doing. And so when we see that you're not, we believe it's because you either hadn't thought about it or you don't know how to approach the work. So we're going to take the mystery out of all of that and make this information widely available to every jurisdiction, to every annual conference COSRO committee, so that everybody can be fast working on this and be able to do the good work that we believe God has called us to in this day and time. Amen. I sound like a preacher, don't I? You all are muted, so I can't hear you. All righty. So if you have any additional comments, again, please drop them in the chat box for us. And thank you all so much. Again, we try to honor your time and get you in and out within, an hour and 10 minutes, maybe an hour and 7. But I, again, appreciate you all being here. And we hope you all have a wonderful day. And we'll see you in about a month. And we're going to get into this, dive deep. If you've got some people in your churches that need to hear this, some clergy people that need to hear this, some district superintendents that need to hear this, give them the link, share it with them. We don't care who it is. This isn't just opening to, just the COSRO folk. Anyone can come and hear this information and learn something and take it back to their areas and do something with it. All righty. Let us all be done for today. And okay. Thank you again.
Thank you all so much. I'm hanging back.
Okay, you don't go anywhere. We've got Jim Patterson here to see you. Thanks.